Hey class, today we're going to continue our discussion on media and we're going to be talking about the ways in which media can influence, specifically different theories on or different models of how media influences people and how media can influence society or the masses as well. So first, before we get into the lesson, just want to remind you, I sent this out in the email as well, but that we're finishing up the chapter, so there will be a quiz tomorrow. And I sent out a few study hints or points or things for you to focus on while you're studying. So just make sure that you focus your study time on those main points about media and the way media influences society. Okay, so now into the lesson today on the potential ways in which media can influence people and society as a whole. So, first and foremost, there's no question about the fact that media does, in fact, influence society. The real questions we should be asking on the topic of media influence on individuals and society is, to what extent does media influence society, and how does media influence society, or through what mechanisms does media have an influence on individuals and society? So, a couple of early theories that existed on media and its influence in society were the hypodermic model and then the mass society theory. So, first, let's talk about the hypodermic model. So, the idea of the hypodermic model was kind of what it sounds like. If you think hypodermic, you should think hypodermic needle, right? Um, so, a hypodermic needle, hypo, under, dermis, skin, like dermis is skin, so hypodermic, under skin. So it's what we think of as an injection, right? It's something that goes under your skin, boom. So the idea of this was that kind of like a hypodermic needle, that it injects something under your skin. The media can inject ideas into people's minds, whether through using advertising strategies, or there were some theories later also of more nefarious means of like different subtle ways of advertising that would use methods of accessing the subconscious to get a message in there. Now, I'm not saying that's what the hypodermic model is all about, but the hypodermic model, the basic idea is media can directly inject an idea into your brain. And that makes you then want to go do what the media is telling you to do. So, for example, if we're talking about advertising, then the idea might be that the message is this, therefore go buy this product. And I mean, we can see how this theory can hold some theoretical water here, where, sometimes you hear something, like I'm sure you all know the Lemon Law commercial song, the jingle for that, right? Or anything that you've seen that's a repetitive ad that you've seen over time, that it sticks in your brain. Now, whether or not it actually makes you want to use that product can be different, right? And we're not just talking about advertising now. We're talking about even ways that media can influence you to think, positions that the media can cause you to hold, right? So this could be a way to understand why individuals in North Korea may hold very strongly to their government's ideologies and maybe fully on board with what their government's doing, even though that is actually oppressing them and the government is mistreating them. Injection or hypodermic model would say, well, the media is injecting thoughts in their minds and therefore they're following them. But that's not quite as nuanced as we'd like it to be. There's another model that's an early theory, and that model is called mass society theory. And mass society theory says that the social ties that people had earlier in time, so we're thinking like really early 1900s, 1800s, those are starting to break apart when this theory comes out. People are moving apart more geographically. The automobile and the prevalence of the automobile means that families can be more fragmented. They're not always together all the time because mobility, like geographic mobility, is much more prevalent. And so it's leaving people more susceptible to the influence of mass media because they're not in that confined family unit, or they're not like in a community, like a neighborhood unit, as much as they used to be. So because they don't have the influence of everyone around them in their cultural circle like they used to, the mass media can therefore shape society into what it wants society to be. So it can create kind of like a cookie cutter society through saying, this is what society is, therefore you should be like this. But when people had strong ties to family, or when people had strong ties to neighborhood, they already knew what society was in their society, so they didn't have the same impact, or that rather the media didn't have the same impact on them. Now, I'm not saying either of these two, hypodermic model or mass society theory, are correct. I'm just saying these are attempts to explain how media has such a powerful influence on individuals. All right, and now we're going to talk about a couple later theories. So there were a couple later theories that attempted to explain why media can influence us so much. And one of these theories is the agenda setting theory. So the agenda setting theory says that media can't tell you what to think, but it can significantly influence what people think about, right? So it's saying the media isn't going to say you must think this exact opinion, but by exposing you to certain stimuli, or by not allowing you to be exposed to certain things, it can influence what you think about. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So the first example is the massive disparity between the way Kavanaugh was treated and the way Biden is being treated when there are allegations of sexual misconduct. Okay? So you probably haven't even heard, or if you have, you've had to tune into a very select few media outlets to hear anything about there being any allegations of sexual misconduct being tied to Joe Biden. Because by and large, the media is just silencing that story. They're not covering it. So it's very difficult for you to think about it if you never see it, right? But when Kavanaugh had his appointment hearings in the Senate, there was basically nothing on the news, I'm using hyperbole, but Kavanaugh's alleged sexual misconduct. Okay? So on one hand, the emphasis for Kavanaugh was, you need to pay attention to this. Pay attention, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. So it's beating you over the head with the proverbial hammer of, you will hear this, and if you hear this, then it'll shape the way that you view reality. And with Biden, if you don't hear it, then you're not going to think about it because you're not being exposed to it. Okay, so that would be an example of this, where the media can't tell you what to think necessarily, but they can affect what you think about, because you can only think about what you're exposed to generally. You have to know about it to think about it, right? We've actually talked about this in class, the concept of known unknowns and unknown unknowns, which sounds weird, but it's true. You can't think about it if you don't know it, right? So the media can influence what you think about. Okay, so that's one example of this, where if the media is not throwing it out there, you're not thinking about it, and if they are, you are. Another example would be with Facebook deplatforming individuals that put anything out there about either participating in or organizing any kind of protest about the lockdowns that governments are doing. They're trying to pull that down so you don't think it's normal or you don't think it's okay. Because if you don't see it, you're not able to think about it. So if you don't see people's pages saying, hey, we're organizing a protest, or these are the reasons why we believe in this protest, then it doesn't enter your sphere of thought because you're not exposed to it. So that would be another example of the media silencing, mass media silencing things they don't want you to be exposed to. Similarly, YouTube is pulling videos down that do not promote, like if they promote some other thought than what the CDC or WHO is putting out about this current situation, they're pulling these videos down because they don't want people being exposed to things like that. Now, we can talk about whether or not that should be happening. I'm not saying whether it should or shouldn't be. I have my own opinions, but I'll let you form yours. But what I'm trying to say is the point is this theory holds some water of, if the media won't let you be exposed to it, you can't think about it. And if they expose you to something, you will think about it. And that's the agenda setting theory. The other theory that's another more modern theory is the idea of cultivation theory. And that's the idea that by repeated long-term exposure to the media's portrayal of the world, people accept that depiction as reality. So if you're exposed to something as reality over and over and over and over again, then you tend to believe that that is reality. And your book points out this idea of the media doing this with culture of fear. And I'll give you two examples of this, like how the media tends to like sensationalize things. One example of this is the Summer of the Shark. Okay, so this is in 2001. I remember when this happened, by the way. So in 2001, the media just like goes nuts with the concept of shark attacks. Shark attack, shark attack, shark attack, shark attack. And there actually wasn't really an increase globally in shark attacks. But the media sensationalized the idea of shark attacks because we like sensation. And so it made it seem like shark attacks were super common and that they happen all the time, or that there must be this incredible increase in shark attacks around the world, or at least in America, because all we're seeing on the news is shark attack. Well, there were no more shark attacks that year than any other year, or at least it wasn't statistically significant. So the Summer of the Shark was all about the media portraying something, and then people thought just by default, well, if they're talking about it this much, there must be a reason, there must be more shark attacks. Well, there weren't. It was cultivation theory. People just thought there were more because they were exposed to it more. Media's reality became a lot of people's reality. Another is that a lot of people, if you poll people in the street, and there have been studies done on this, people think crime is increasing. They always think crime is increasing, and they think crime is a massive problem in America. And I think any crime is too much crime, obviously. We don't want there to be crime. But the crime rate over time has been decreasing pretty steadily, or at least from like the 90s to now. For most types of crime, a couple types of crime from like 2007 till now, there's been a marked decrease. Now, it may not be a massive decrease in some categories, but generally, by and large, crime rates in America are decreasing. But most people, if you ask them, they'll think crime rates are increasing because of the news's coverage of them. So this is cultivation theory. If you're exposed to something over and over and over and over again, then you're going to accept that as reality. So if you see crime in the news all the time, all the time, all the time, then it's just a natural reaction to think that there's a lot more crime than there used to be, because all you're seeing is crime in the news. It's what the media is doing. It's the idea of they're portraying reality in a certain way, and then people accept that reality as real reality. So all of these theories about how media influences people have some truth to them, but it's very difficult to find a holistic explanation of exactly the mechanisms that media uses and exactly the ways in which we are influenced by media. So how do they influence us, and how do we accept that influence? So sociologically, we're still looking for explanations of exactly what mechanisms are used. Like, how practically can we break this down into how it works? And I think part of the issue is it's just a more esoteric issue. It's not so much a qualitative as a quantitative issue. And it's a qualitative issue, not quantitative. And qualitative issues are hard to quantify by definition because they don't have quantity in them. So how do we explain this? Well, that's something I'd like you guys to think about. Obviously you're supposed to be studying for the quiz, but just in life, how do we explain the mechanisms media uses to influence us, and how do we explain the causes of us accepting the influence of media? It's just something that's a cool thing to look into, and it's just a very interesting phenomenon. So I'll just leave you with that. Think about it more. It's a fun topic. Explore it. If you have any questions or you'd like to continue the discussion, feel free to reach out and email me. All right, I hope you all have a great day.